The manager's fingers were trembling as he bolted the heavy oak door, the click sounding like a gunshot in the silent office. "Don't look away," he whispered, his eyes wide with a terror I didn't yet understand. "And for God's sake, Claire, don't make a sound." On the flickering security screen, I watched my husband, the man whose child I wanted to carry, reach into my purse with the cold, surgical precision of a killer. He wasn't stealing my money. He was replacing my life-saving medication with a slow-acting poison designed to drive me insane while his mother and sister toasted to my health just inches away. My anniversary wasn't a celebration. It was the opening act of my execution, and the people I loved most were the executioners. My name is Clare Whitman. I am 34 years old, and I am the CEO of Whitman International Logistics. My father started this company with one rusted truck and a map of the interstate. He ended it as a multi-billion-dollar empire that bridges continents. He taught me how to read a balance sheet before I could ride a bike, and he taught me that in business, the person who speaks the least usually knows the most. But when he died 3 years ago, I became a target. I just didn't realize the bullseye was painted on my back by my own husband. Daniel was a dream. He was a high-level consultant who didn't seem intimidated by my wealth. He was attentive, grounding, and seemingly devoted to my legacy. When we married, it felt like the final piece of the puzzle. I brought him into the inner circle. I brought his mother, Eleanor, into our guest house. I even welcomed Brooke Miller, the girl he'd grown up with in the foster system, treating her like the sister I never had. I gave them everything: luxury, status, and my absolute trust. But for the last 6 months, the world had been tilting. It started with the fog. I'd wake up dizzy, my vision blurred, my memory leaking like a cracked faucet. I'd lose my car keys, forget board meetings, and hear whispers in the walls of our sprawling estate. Daniel was always there to catch me. "It's the stress, honey," he'd say, rubbing my temples. "You're pushing too hard. Let me handle the morning briefings. Just take your supplements and rest." The dinner at the Gilded Anchor was supposed to be our 3rd anniversary. It was an opulent affair, velvet curtains, crystal chandeliers, and a view of the city that looked like a carpet of diamonds. Daniel looked stunning in his bespoke suit. Eleanor was draped in pearls I'd bought her for her birthday. Brooke was glowing in a silk dress. They were the picture of a supportive family. "To Claire," Eleanor said, raising a glass of vintage Cristal. "To the woman who holds us all together. May your health return as swiftly as your success." I smiled, though my head throbbed. Brooke leaned over and poured more wine into my glass. "You look a bit pale, Claire. Did you take your vitamins tonight?" "I did," I whispered, feeling a wave of nausea. "Good girl," Daniel said, squeezing my hand. His touch felt cold. When the dinner ended, we walked to the valet. It was only then that I realized my purse, the vintage leather bag containing my phone, my private ledger, and my medication, was missing. I'd left it at the table. "I'll go back," I said, swaying slightly. "No, Claire, you're exhausted," Daniel insisted, his voice firm. "I'll get it. You stay here with Mom and Brooke." "I need the air, Daniel." "I'll go. It'll take 2 minutes." I didn't wait for his protest. I turned and walked back into the restaurant. I thought I was being a stubborn wife. I had no idea I was walking toward the light that would burn my entire life to the ground. Samuel Brooks, the manager, met me at the entrance. He wasn't holding my purse. He was holding a tablet. His face was the color of ash. He'd seen me dining with Daniel many times. My father had been a silent partner in this restaurant. "Mrs. Whitman," he said, his voice barely audible. "I need you to see something before I give you your bag." In that locked office, the truth played out in high definition. I watched myself leave the table to use the restroom. The moment the door swung shut behind me, the loving family transformed. Daniel didn't look worried. He looked busy. He opened my purse, pulled out my white supplement bottle, and dumped the contents into a napkin. From his pocket, he produced a small plastic bag of identical-looking pills. He refilled the bottle, his hand steady, his expression bored. Eleanor didn't look away in horror. She leaned in, whispering something into Daniel's ear that made him chuckle. Then she looked at Brooke. My sister reached across the table, took Daniel's hand, and kissed his knuckles. It wasn't a platonic kiss. It was the kiss of a lover. Just a few more weeks, I heard Brooke's voice through the high-fidelity audio Samuel had installed for security. Once the board sees her fall apart at the summit, she's done. We'll have the conservatorship by the end of the month. She's already hearing the voices I've been playing through the speakers, Daniel said, a cruel grin spreading across his face. She thinks she's losing her mind. She's making it too easy. I didn't scream. I didn't faint. My father's daughter took over. I felt a cold, crystalline rage freeze my blood. I looked at Samuel. "Give me the purse," I said. "And I need a copy of this footage on a secure drive. Now." "Mrs. Whitman, your husband is outside," Samuel warned. "I know. And he's waiting for a wife who is too drugged to notice he's a monster. I'm going to give him exactly what he wants to see." I walked back to the car with the purse. I told Daniel the manager had been so helpful. I climbed into the back seat with Elena and Brooke, and I let my head fall back, pretending the fog was taking me. I felt Daniel's eyes on me in the rearview mirror. He was checking the status of his investment. When we got home, the performance continued. Daniel brought me a glass of water and a pill from the bottle he'd just tampered with. I placed it in my mouth, tucked it under my tongue, and took a deep swallow of water. I waited for him to leave before spitting the pill into a tissue. That night, I didn't sleep. I waited until the house was silent, the heavy, oppressive silence of a tomb. I moved through the shadows of my own home, a stranger in my own life. I went to the bedroom where I'd been hearing the whispers. I searched behind the heavy velvet curtains, under the bed, inside the vents. And then I found it. Taped to the back of a framed portrait of my father was a microspeaker, barely the size of a coin. It was connected to a Bluetooth receiver. They had been playing recordings of my own name, distorted and low, during the hours I was most vulnerable. I photographed the device. Then I moved to Daniel's private study. He kept it locked, but he'd forgotten that I owned the deed to this house and every lock within it. I used the master key I kept in the floor safe in the library. Inside his desk, I found the consultant's true work. There were forged medical reports from a doctor I'd never met, detailing a progressive schizophrenic break. There were legal documents already drafted, a petition for a permanent conservatorship that would give Daniel full control of Whitman International. But the final blow was a small, tattered envelope tucked inside a false bottom in his drawer. It contained a marriage certificate. Daniel Whitman and Brooke Miller. They hadn't met in the foster system. They were husband and wife. They had been married 5 years before I ever met Daniel. This wasn't just a betrayal, it was a long con. I was a project they had been working on for years. They had targeted me, seduced me, and were now in the process of lobotomizing me with psychotropic drugs to steal my father's life's work. I sat in the dark of his office, the moonlight hitting the logistics maps on the wall. I realized that if I went to the police now, they would flee. They had offshore accounts. I'd seen the bank statements in the drawer. They would take what they'd already stolen and vanish. No, I wanted them to lose everything in front of the people they were trying to impress. The next morning, I called Andrew Collins. Andrew was more than a lawyer. He was the man who had pulled my father out of every legal fire for 30 years. "Claire," he said, sensing the change in my voice immediately. "You sound different." "The fog has lifted, Andrew," I said. "I need a forensic accountant, a private security team, and a chemist. And I need the board of directors gathered for an emergency session at the Whitman Summit tomorrow. Tell them it's a transition of power." "Claire, what's happening?" "I'm performing an execution, Andrew. I'd like you to be the witness." The next 24 hours were a masterpiece of deception. I played the part of the crumbling CEO to perfection. I let my hair go unbrushed. I let my speech slur. I watched Daniel and Brooke exchange glances of pure, unfiltered triumph. They thought they were watching a queen fall. They didn't realize they were walking into a guillotine. The Whitman Summit was held in the glass-walled boardroom on the 60th floor of the Whitman Tower. The board was there, 12 men and women who had known my father, their faces etched with concern. In the corner stood a man in a lab coat, the doctor Daniel had hired to certify my instability. Daniel stood at the head of the table, his hand resting supportively on my shoulder. "Thank you all for coming," Daniel said, his voice heavy with fake grief. "As you know, Claire's health has been a primary concern for us all. It breaks my heart to say this, but the medical team has reached a conclusion. Clare is no longer capable of the cognitive load required to lead this empire. For the safety of the company, I am stepping in as the interim administrator." He slid the documents across the table. The board members looked at me. I sat there, head down, shoulders slumped. "Claire," one of the board members asked, "do you understand what's happening?" I lifted my head. The slowness was gone. The fog had vanished. I stood up, and the sheer force of my posture made Daniel's hand drop from my shoulder as if he'd been burned. "I understand perfectly," I said. My voice was like a sharpened blade, cutting through the thick air of the room. "I understand that my husband is a bigamist, a fraud, and an attempted murderer." The room went deathly silent. Daniel tried to laugh, a nervous, high-pitched sound. "Claire, honey, you're having an episode. Doctor, please." "The only episode happening here, Daniel, is the series of crimes you've committed on camera," I said. I nodded to Andrew. He pressed a button on the remote. The 100-inch screen behind me flared to life. It wasn't a corporate slideshow. It was the security footage from the Gilded Anchor. The board watched in horror as Daniel swapped the pills. They watched Brooke kiss his hand. They heard the audio of them planning to throw me out like trash. "That's a fabrication," Daniel screamed, his face turning a sickly shade of grey. "That's AI. It's high-definition forensic evidence, Daniel," I said. "Along with the microspeakers I found in our bedroom playing your voice. Along with the illegal psychotropic drugs the chemist found in the bottle you gave me this morning. And most importantly," I threw the marriage certificate onto the table, "along with proof that you and Brooke are already married. Which makes our marriage a legal nullity and your claim to my estate an absolute zero." The boardroom doors burst open. My private security team entered, followed by detectives from the Major Crimes Division. Brooke tried to run for the side exit, but Andrew was already there. Elena, who had been waiting in the lobby for the celebration, was brought in by officers, her pearls clacking as she began to wail that she knew nothing. Daniel looked around the room, the walls of glass suddenly feeling like the bars of a cage. He looked at me, his eyes full of a pathetic, desperate rage. "I gave you everything," he spat. "I gave you the best 3 years of your life. You gave me a reason to remember who my father was," I said, leaning in close so only he could hear. "He didn't just build trucks, Daniel. He built an empire that crushes anything that gets in its way. And today, you're just a speed bump." As they were led out in handcuffs, the board members stood in a stunned, respectful silence. I walked to the window and looked out at the city. The headaches were gone. The vision was clear. The legal battle that followed was swift. Because the marriage was bigamous, Daniel had no right to a single cent. Every gift, every car, and every penny he'd funneled into offshore accounts was clawed back by the forensic team. The doctor lost his license and faced prison time for conspiracy. Elena was evicted from the guest house within the hour, her designer bags tossed into the driveway. I kept the logistics empire. I grew it. I renamed the flagship terminal after my father, but I kept the boardroom exactly as it was. It serves as a reminder. People ask me why I didn't just leave the moment I saw the video. Why the theater? Why the summit? I tell them the same thing my father told me. In this world, it's not enough to win. You have to make sure the person who tried to break you never forgets the sound of the floor falling out from under them. My name is Clare Whitman. I am the CEO of an empire, a survivor of a war, and the woman who proved that even the thickest fog can't hide the truth from someone who refuses to close their eyes. The anniversary dinner was a funeral, after all, but it wasn't mine. It was theirs.